Welcome to Terror in Tandem, a podcast about finding entertainment in the macabre, hosted by the knowledgeable and lovable Laura and Richard Mathiasen. Each episode we discuss the horror genre, from books to film to TV and beyond. Sometimes even from the beyond. You can find us on YouTube at Terror in Tandem or on Instagram at Terror in Tandem. And you'll always find our latest episode on our website, terrorintandem.com.
Or wherever you get your podcasts.
Well, if you're listening, then you've figured out how to get our podcast.
That's the conundrum. Yeah. Tell your friends.
Yeah, tell your friends where to get it.
Welcome back, co-host from your recent trip.
Yeah, I do definitely want to give a shout out to all of the people that I met in Denver. I got such a warm welcome from folks,
a chilly town.
Yeah, well, it was actually warmer there.
Yeah.
From folks I met, and they were and seemed genuinely interested in the pod. So, thank you, Denver, for welcoming Terror in Tandem.
Welcome to the family.
At least the terror part.
Take as deep a breath as you can at that elevation.
Yeah.
And enjoy this upcoming episode dedicated to the wonderful weirdos of Denver. Speaking of which, what are we doing today?
Nothing that has to do with witches.
No, witch. WHICH.
Oh.
Speaking of which.
Oh, I thought you meant, because, your book sort of
could
have.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So
podcast.
What we're doing today, audience.
Speaking of monsters.
Segue. Just welcome back to the people of Denver and jumping right in with our newest segment.
Well, we did it once before.
Yeah. With our newest segment, Made You. So this one's going to be Made You Read.
Yeah. Last time we did Made You Watch. And it was the incredible duo of you made me watch 2 episodes of Black Mirror, and I made you watch the criminally underseen 80s B camp classic Dead and Buried.
Yeah, you'll see a theme with the mages. I'm already starting to piece together that one of us wants the other one to be really uncomfortable.
No. We'll talk about that. I know where you're headed with this.
So, as we get into this episode, I made Richard read a novel, and that novel, which I've talked about on the pod before, but it is called Harvest Home. It is written by Thomas Tryon, and I believe it is from 1973.
Mm-hmm.
So it was like a year before I was born. I bet you it sort of inspired my birth.
Well, there are scenes. Yeah. Honestly.
And
the harvest was really good the year you were born.
Yeah. Corning. So anyway,
we're going to talk about corn.
I'm going to give a little brief synopsis of the book, a few little factoids, and then why I chose it for my co-host.
Fantastic.
So
I
first read Harvest Home sometime when I was a teenager, and my uncle had given it to me because he knew that I really liked horror, especially Stephen King, and he said, you need to read this. So I read it and I loved it. And it was really interesting because I don't read a lot of folk horror. I don't think. Maybe I do, and I just don't know it or didn't know it at the time. Anyway, a brief synopsis is that a family moves from the chaos and crime of city to country life. Ned Constantine and his family, his wife and his daughter,
Beth and Kate.
Yes, they pick everything up. His daughter has severe asthma, and so they're suffering living in the city with all the pollution and
the crime.
Crime is getting bad. So just like a lot of folks in the 70s.
Actually, it's mentioned several times in this novel that, and I think Thomas Tryon capitalized on this trend, the movement to the country, which I don't know if you did this
basically the rise of the suburbs.
I don't know. It's well past the rise of the suburbs. This is more like in the 70s, people in the cities were en masse moving out to the country, not the suburbs, to like
the country. Yeah, because they didn't trust.
They were sick of the cities.
Systems and governments, and
it's. I don't know if you did this on purpose, but we're experiencing. And what happened after that was, of course, a lot of people discovered, hey, I'm actually a city dweller. Yeah. I'm not built to live in the fucking country. This was an idea I didn't really think through.
Right, because you have to do everything yourself.
There's also an established culture that you're not part of that a lot of people don't consider. But what's really struck me is we're currently now at the tail end of another mass migration movement where, during the pandemic, a lot of people moved out of the cities, and now you're seeing article after article of people with regret of being like, whoa, I had no idea that when I moved to the country, there'd be different people here with different ways of life. And they're kind of regretting, like,
it's a common theme.
Yeah, the romanticism of it doesn't always match the reality.
Yeah, you just want to get away from it all, and sometimes all you need is maybe a weekend.
Yeah, there's a difference between a vacation and uprooting your life.
Anyway, they search in New England to find a place to settle, and they happen to settle in the village of Cornwall Combe.
Is that how you I pronounced it Coombe?
I mean, it could be. I pronounce it Cornwall Combe.
Cornwall Combe.
It's double O, so
yeah. Whatever. The important word is corn.
Yes. Corn, right. A wall of corn. They quickly befriend the town matriarch, the widow Fortune, and are invited to, participate in the community events, although there is a lot of mystery to this Harvest Home Festival that happens every 7 years. It's really the town is really meant to focus on planting, tending to, and harvesting corn. And there are all their festivities and celebrations surround the corn, like the Harvest Lord and the Corn Maiden. And so Ned, being the city person he is and feeling like he's entitled to know everything that's been going on for a very long time in this community, starts digging into these traditions and asking questions and hearing rumors about things. And honestly, I honestly think that his nosy neighbor attitude is his own undoing. And so he breaks the rules and watches the Harvest Home ritual take place. Something terrible happens, and he is forever cursed, I would say. So that's essentially the core of the novel. I do think that the deeper message of this book, at least from what I took away from it, is outsiders coming in and trying to take over or, take on things that have been done that way. As if there's a wrongness to it. You bring your own sense of morality and you attach a good or bad element to it. So I think that's part of it. And also gentrification. There's always this idea of when outsiders move into a community that's very tight-knit, that has traditions, and then those traditions stop being part of the community, then it opens itself up for gentrification and modernization. But this community is really not going to adhere to those new modernity, the push for modernity here. And then also the other thing is I think the story is really about belonging and coming together for the common good, regardless of what morals you put on how they achieve that common good. This utopia, in order to sustain it, they have to practice things that might not be palatable by people who aren't part of this community. The book was the inspiration for Children of the Corn. Stephen King has said this. It was published the same year as The Wicker Man. It's a lesser known horror novel, and obviously it's a folk horror, and I have no doubt that it's inspired some of the Dave Eggers, Ari Aster's of contemporary horror cinema, because there are a lot of common themes and similar tropes that play out in their films that are also in this novel from the 70s. So do you want to talk at all about, add anything to the synopsis, or do you want me to tell everyone why I chose this for
absolutely. You? So, poor old Ned. I disagree a little bit with you on your characterization of the Constantines. They, on the one hand, they're very...
I'm not lumping Constantines. I'm lumping just Ned. Ned is the one that brings his own...
Sure. Okay. Then I disagree with your slightly with your characterization of Ned. Now, yes, he is nosy, but he comes to this place. There's definitely the sort of ingrained arrogance of the modern, kind of stereotypical city dweller of like coming to an old place and just expecting that they'll slot right in. But to Ned's credit, he really does work very hard to ingratiate himself to these people. And as you get to know what's going on, and the thing about this novel is it's around 400 pages long, and 300 of those are a slow, steady building of the town, the characters, and dropping of hints, which are pretty wonderfully executed in the last 100 pages. The pace really picks up, but also it calls back to a number of moments that were scattered throughout the novel that you kind of lodged in the back of your mind as like, that might be something. And then when everything's connected. But when you find out the level of manipulation that's been going on regarding Ned and his family, how much he's been led to
it's true that Ned and his family were brought there for unsavory reasons, but there was never Ned was never the target of this,
Well, he had two choices essentially, which was to buy in and become part of the town or be forced to become part of the town. That's it. I mean,
he does make a lot of bad choices
Ned
and
was
decisions.
Sure, but he was doomed the moment he bought that house.
And I disagree. I don't think that he was doomed. I think that he brought on his own doomings because of his constant probing and picking apart, not following rules, not heeding warnings, making bad mistakes, doing the wrong things at the wrong time.
That definitely affected his personal outcome. But as for his family's being taken into the town, that was going to happen the moment they stepped foot in the town, is what I'm saying. Is his family, they owned them. He never had a chance.
Well,
and that's kind of what you find out.
To go to the town.
Yes, of course.
To take up this, sort of invitation.
But how could you know that the town you want to move to has a thousands-year-old cult from the old country that sacrifices people?
No, you couldn't.
But, to his credit, he does really try to become one of the townsfolk. But also to his credit, when he starts discovering things that are, I would say, universally looked down upon, like, murder and mutilation, he asks questions, and maybe he shouldn't. And I'm not 100% in Ned's corner. He's written quite authentically as a pretty selfish guy. Listen, he's the guy of a certain generation that we've all met and have lost patience with. It's just he's the hero of his own story, and everything relates back to him.
Well, there's no hero to this tale, really.
No, but what I mean is,
everybody makes these decisions that ultimately have fatal consequences.
Ned is very self-centered. He does have a good heart, and he does do the right thing, but he's a pretty selfish guy. He's a pretty self-centered guy. He's quite flawed. He certainly doesn't deserve everything he goes through. No one does. But I want to focus less on Ned because he's not nearly the most interesting character in the book. It's the Widow Fortune.
Well, let me tell everybody why I chose this book for you first.
Go for it.
And then you can break it all apart.
Love it.
In the way that you want. So I chose this book because of your love of folk horror. And of late, your favorite horror movies have been, The Witch, Midsommar. You do love, we did that episode on folk horror. And when I brought this book up,
a now intergalactic classic,
you had mentioned you never read it. And nope. I knew that you would love it because of the reasons that I explained, but also because it's always a question in the back of your head. And I think that this is where the character of Ned really is, the strength of the character of Ned is. He's trying to uncover the mystery of this town for us, the reader. He is asking these questions because we can't. So we need him as a conduit to trying to figure out what's going on. And as he starts to learn the truth, we start to learn the truth. And that is a perspective of, consumption of horror that I particularly enjoy is everyone else knows the truth, but you as the watcher doesn't.
There are moments of foreshadowing, certainly, but in terms of the details of what's happening, you do learn the same time Ned does.
It's a niche horror novel that not a lot of people talk about. I think, like I said, it influenced Children of the Corn. It definitely has to have influenced some of those horror directors that I mentioned, in the whole aspect of, coming to a community. I mean, it probably even influenced M. Night Shyamalan's The Village. So I just thought that you would really enjoy this very influential, rare, and lesser known horror novel. So on to you. Tell me what you thought, and tell me, what stood out for you and what you didn't like.
Well, I loved it. Big fan. It's definitely a folk tale, a folk horror. And here's the thing about folk horror. They're slow burns. When you're watching a slow burn, that's 2 hours or so. When you're reading a slow burn, that's hundreds of pages. Not to say that it's boring. I didn't find it boring at all. The characterizations were fascinating between Jack Stump, Worthy Pettinger, and, the incredible Widow Fortune. The Widow Fortune is just a really amazingly well-written character in that it wasn't until something's off, right? Pretty much early on, based on the kind of book you're reading and her status as the town's matriarch, that she's probably the ringleader, but she's so likable and she's so interesting, that it's really not until her machinations are self-revealed. I mean, she's so confident that she basically Bond villains, and still wins. Listen, I don't mean to spoil a book from 1973, but it's a folk horror tale, and tell me a folk horror tale that has a happy ending. This has a wonderful, bleak, gut punch of an ending, and quite a Grecian tragedy type ending, and that's fitting because this was heavily influenced by worship of Demeter, the Greek god of the harvest, Demeter. It's mentioned in the book. the many incarnations of Mother Earth, of the fertility god, and the fact that that is part of life is blood. We're born in blood and pain. We die, we rot, we return. Nature is cruel and beautiful. Life persists, but maybe not your individual life, you know? So it's the difference between an individual's life and life itself.
Yeah.
But the Widow Fortune is so awesome. She's such a character. And even though you know she's evil, you can't help but be drawn to her. It's a beautifully written book.
Yes.
I found it very well paced. It's a slow read, but it's only 400 pages, so it's not like Moby Dick length.
I wouldn't say it's
it's a measured read.
Yeah, it's a book you want to take your time with because it's so thickly written.
And there are moments that punctuate when Worthy has a breakdown and damns the corn during a church service. That's huge.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a big, bombastic moment. The fight between the Soakses in the town. There are moments that punctuate Kate's near-death experience with her incredible asthma, like the worst asthma anyone's ever had. But there's a lot going on in this book.
This was before inhalers existed.
This, well, she has something called a medihaler.
Yeah.
Which, I imagine being, like big, clunky. So this was written by Thomas Tryon, who was an actor who became a writer after being dissatisfied with his career. And one of the more interesting things about Thomas Tryon is he was a deeply closeted and secretive homosexual. He was married to a woman for a number of years who they got divorced and she killed herself. Not really sure why, but he was had secret lovers, and one of whom was a very prolific male porn star. But he died in 1991 of HIV-related complications and lied about it. Had his agent or his publicist release a statement saying he died of stomach cancer, and that was a real source of controversy amongst the community because he was a handsome, well-known actor and writer who could have maybe advocated and spoken out during what's known as the Dark Ages, the dark times.
I'm sure that there can be a lot of parallels drawn between his being in the closet.
Well, reading about Thomas Tryon's personal life
and how people are treated when the secret gets out.
It was impossible for me to separate the two. I started to see Ned's otherness in the town because in a situation like if Ned were in New York, in Chelsea, he'd be fine. He would fit in. He's comes from a Greek background. He's a New Yorker. He'd be no problem.
Yeah.
But you stick him in another situation and he's in mortal danger. That is very typical of the homosexual experience. Where in one environment you're
especially
very comfortable and
70s.
safe. Yeah, absolutely. And in another environment you are literally at risk of your life.
And I think that is a common shared feeling, not just about, people of varied sexual orientations. I think it also has gender identity, people of, different skin colors. I think that's sort of the otherness.
The otherness. Yeah. Yeah. So, obviously I read some of that in there and, all of the secrets going on in this town. That's the other thing I like about this book is it's got all the Twin Peaks small town shit going on. Mm-hmm. Weird characters, and all that. So it's a sumptuous book. It's very well written. It's interesting you mentioned Stephen King because when it was released, Stephen King wrote a review of it or a critique where he gave sort of a backhanded compliment, or he in the same review said that it was a very well written, but that it wasn't particularly good, that it wasn't really a horror novel, but that despite that, 40 years from now, when we're all, forgotten about, the libraries will still be binding new editions of Harvest Home. So I thought that was really interesting, and especially since you went to say that it influenced Children of the Corn. Now, yeah, corn. Here's the thing. This town, everything is corn. And it's very based on the puritanical social structure of the early settlers, where the community was central, even over the family. That's hard for Americans today, I think, to understand, where we have really gone the way of individual family at the loss of community. But back in these days, or back in colonial times, the community was everything, because if it wasn't, everyone died. So Cornwall Coombe is very much that way. It's all about the corn. This town lives and dies by the corn. If there's a good harvest, they live. If there's a bad harvest, they're fucked. And they still talk about the blight of 14 years ago that nearly wiped out the town. So every 7 years, they choose a new harvest lord. And that used to be done by vote, but now it's done by the prognostication of this weird little girl that reads sheep guts, which is cool and leads to a pretty cool scene.
Yeah.
Missy Penrose. And the harvest lord for 7 years gets treated like a king and gets all the benefits of the town. And then after 7 years, a new harvest lord is chosen. And, well,
that harvest lord.
what do you think happens to the old harvest lord? This is a story based on blood and fertility.
They've done
and
their part.
Death and decay. Well, yeah. So there's a
now
real
they have another part.
there's
to
a real
play.
praying mantis aspect. And I will say that the phrase "make the corn with each other" is now my new favorite thing. And the only way I'll be referring to sex is making corn. So
Lucky me.
we can just take a break and maybe make some corn. No, so I really enjoyed the novel, and I know why you recommended it to me. It was perfect for me. I mean, it was right up my alley. It's a literary, well-paced, methodical, and folk horror with a whiz-bang ending. You know, just things really, really whip into a frenzy by the end of it, with like any good slow burn, and then it leaves you feeling, ugh. It is just...
Well, if you think of the novel like the whole concept of planting a seed of corn and then, you know, growing the corn and then harvesting and consumption are the quickest part.
Yeah, and that is...
So it's like the novel was almost laid out like
that
it's
is
planting
very,
a seed,
very smart, Laura.
the seed has grown, and now it's time to...
I will give
to
credit
reap.
to the late Mr. Tryon that all of the seeds he plants in this novel are reaped by the end of it. It's not a book that leaves you feeling like, what? You really get what happened.
You don't want to go to this town.
That's not to detract from the mystery or the satisfaction of the reveal. It's just, it's not the kind of book that leaves you wondering why. Beyond maybe, oh my God, how long has this been going on? Because they make a lot of mention of these weird traditions being taken to the New World, you know, on the Mayflower and things like that. So I loved it. It's my first 5 out of 5 book that I've read this year. I don't normally award books that high of a score. It really, really needs to stick with me. So I'm very grateful that you recommended this to me.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad you liked it because I love it. And now we have a mutual love of this book.
Nice. Do you want to take a little breaky?
Let's do it.
Welcome back.
Oh, hi.
So that is
What did
Harvest
you make
Home.
me read?
Okay. Before I get into that, I understand now that we've done 2 of these that you and I have approached these maybe a little differently. You seem to be picking things for me that you are relatively sure I'm going to enjoy. And so far, you're right. And you always are. You really know me and you have impeccable taste. But it's become clear to me that I've been doing things a little differently. I have chosen 2 things that I'm pretty sure you'll like, but they're a little bit of a leap, and I'm choosing them to push you a little. I chose Dead and Buried because the setting and the sort of style of it I thought would really appeal to you, but I also wanted to push you a little in terms of the content. And this time I went I may have overdone it a little bit. I went with Clive Barker's The Hellhound Heart, his seminal novella introducing the world to the Hell Priest himself, Pinhead, and his merry band of Cenobites.
Yes.
As well as the puzzle box, Kirsty, and all the chain hooks and BDSM.
The cottons.
Yep. So, this book... Well, before I go too deep into what it means to me and why I chose it, why don't you tell us a little bit about what it's about?
Sure. So the book is a little bit different than the film, the first Hellraiser, although there are some definitely parallels between the two. But I'm just going to be talking about the synopsis of the novella. So Rory Cotton and his wife, Julia, is his second wife, move into a home that Rory's brother Frank had been living / squatting in. And it's really a mess. It's really decrepit. There's food left behind. There's rodents. There's maggots. And then there's this one room, empty room, that Julia walks into and feels the dampness. And so Clive Barker really does tell this tale from kind of Julia's perspective a little bit of the dampness, this room, it's calling to her. And essentially what happens is they discover, well, Julia discovers what has become of Frank, and her call is to help him come back to himself. So that's like the essential, I would say, 30 seconds of the novel. But what starts out in the novel is a really vivid writing of Frank Cotton finding this box, or actually purchasing this box, and wanting to go further than he's ever gone before. He wants the ultimate pleasure. He's in search of pleasures beyond pleasures. He's a disgusting horn dog.
Yeah. So the whole point of the Cenobites is it blurs the line between pain and pleasure, and that all pleasure, and if you think about it, it's true. If you turn up the dial on any pleasurable sensation too high and you make it last too long, that's no longer fun. That's torture.
Well, it's a little
horrible.
bit of the complete abandonment to the pleasure.
Yeah.
Is like the painful experience of
that.
And
it's nasty. So this book was very important to me because when I was a teenager devouring every Stephen King novel that I could, the other name that kept coming up was Clive Barker. Everybody kept talking about Clive Barker. And this was the days of big, chunky mass market paperbacks. So when I read a Magica, it was one book that was like 1,000 pages long. You know, it was massive, and it still only cost like $4. And it was also the era of really dope cover art.
Yeah.
So every single Clive Barker novel had a quote by Stephen King on it, calling him the new master of horror. So I was like, well, I've got to read this guy. And I think I started with his first novel, The Damnation Game, which has I don't think it's ever been adapted. And wow, what a missed opportunity. It is terrifying. And then I just read everything I could. And The Hellbound Heart obviously is a classic. It introduces Pinhead, although he's not named that in the book.
No, he's never named that.
He's actually never named that.
Nobody is named. They're only the Cenobites.
Yeah. The only time he's ever named is later. He's called the Hell Priest by Clive Barker. But
that is
Pinhead
like,
is just like the
I feel like
popular,
that's just like a label.
Well, in like the
As
Scarlet,
the Hell Priest stood there. You know what I mean? It's
no,
not...
in like the follow up novel, the Scarlet Gospels, he is the like capital,
but
H,
not in
capital
this
P.
novel.
No. So
essentially, this character Frank Cotton is searching for his version of this, like, I don't know, utopia,
and the whole point of it is
hedonism,
going for things that you're not supposed to.
And he finds the Cenobites, and now his fate is way worse than any death he could have imagined.
Yeah, he goes to hell,
and he is reaching out from this place to his sister-in-law Julia, who you find out they had an affair before. Like Julia married Rory, like the night before, or a couple
she's
days
not
before.
Not a nice lady.
And in order for Frank to fully come back, or not fully, but to come back as something, he needs blood.
Yeah, because he comes back as like a steaming pile of goo over a skeleton.
And Julia is first, by accident, Rory cuts himself during, reconstructing this house or revitalizing this house, and drips blood on the floor in this room, and then it disappears. And so Julia starts to understand that he needs blood, and she starts to pick up like single or males on the troll from local bars and killing them.
Yeah, she picks up like sad sacks. It's pathetic.
Or
and
horny
sad.
sacks.
Well, some of them are like a-holes, and some of them you kind of feel bad for.
Yeah.
Now, the reason I chose this for you is I know you've never seen Hellraiser, which is, I understand why, and I never meant for you to watch the movie. I figured, okay, maybe she can handle the book. It's short. I didn't know you were going to pick a 400-page novel for me.
Well, I gave you like 5 months to read it. So.
I had plenty of time. Mm-hmm. So, but I also... It's a challenging read because of its blending of not only the severity of its description, but it's a blending of eroticism and horror. It's Clive Barker, his horror is inextricably erotic. It is. It's very sensual and sometimes obscene. It's
yes, it's very visceral, very
it's a lot of body horror.
Described,
and he is a wonderful writer.
I do want to get a little bit more into the summary of the book, because we haven't mentioned Kirsty.
No,
and Kirsty is sort of this friend who wants to be Rory's lover, but Julia's in the way, and so there's this tenuous relationship between the two of them, and Kirsty's very calculating. She goes to this dinner party at their house and ends up like flirting and hooking up with this random guy. But she's really trying to, I don't know, get Julia out of the picture. So she constantly comes back to the house, and we are discovering what's going on with Julia. She's discovering that there's something wrong and that Frank is still alive. Even when he does end up becoming Rory, she figures out that it is, in fact, Frank, because of the, come to daddy, which he uses quite often because he is a predator. He's a sexual predator.
Disgusting, gross Frank with his dirty fingernails.
What I thought was really interesting, and as I was researching post reading this novel, is that Clive Barker really struggled with the follow-up to this novel.
Yes.
He was a hustler, he was a male escort in the 70s, and he would go to S&M clubs in New York City, and he would see, you know, like the juxtaposition between pleasure and pain, people getting pierced in very delicate places for fun,
tender parts,
and, you know, pushing sexual sadomasochism levels. And then, you know, he decided to ultimately write this book because of the world and the dark place that he had witnessed for himself, and a way to, almost a cautionary tale to, like, there has to be some limits.
Yes.
Because you will, if you push it too far,
you'll
then
lose
you'll
yourself.
go too far.
Yeah, and this very much is a cautionary tale.
It's a corruption.
There's the box that you should never open. There's
Yes.
the line that should never be crossed, and it's always like the people that come upon this, that seek this thing out, are the world's worst people. Like, they are people who have abused life to the point that they don't feel anything anymore.
Yep.
So,
and the box, so the puzzle box, Lamar Chan's configuration.
yes.
It's a wooden puzzle box, and it does open this portal for Frank. But at the end of the novella, it ends up in Kirsty's hands, but she doesn't open it.
Good move, Kirsty.
At least she doesn't in this novel. I haven't read any follow-ups, so I don't know what happened to her outside of the film. Yeah. But
what's canon and what isn't. There's only one novel that Clive Barker wrote to follow it up, but it took many different forms. It took like 30 years to write, and it went from being like 1,500 pages long to being like 300 pages long. And there are a lot of, it happened after a very significant health tragedy in his life, so it reads very differently than his other works, is the kindest way I can put it.
Yeah.
It doesn't, nothing that Clive Barker has written since 2012 really reads the same as his previous work.
Yeah, and so what I really enjoyed about this book was it was very well written. It was very descriptive, and that was also like not enjoyable because of how descriptive it was.
Yes.
Because it is very violent and visceral and depraved and dark.
That's the thing. It's not just violent. It's violent in a way that and in places where you don't want violence to occur.
But I really liked the cat and mouse game of Kirsty and, you know, discovering Julia and Rory's fate, to see how far down the like dark hole that Julia was going to, how compromised her character became, almost like a possession of her. Because I don't think she started out being a terrible person. I think, she slept with Frank because he was
it's like a Svengali.
It was almost like a rape.
Yeah.
But not because she did consent, but
it was
like, I don't have the choice to not consent.
Yeah.
So I'm going to do this. And then she found that was pleasurable. And she wanted more of it, but she married Rory and had a life with him, and everything was fine. It wasn't like she was, oh, I wonder what Frank's up to. Oh, I just want to get back in Frank's arms. It was this call of the room. Like I said, it was almost like a possession.
Frank's a bad guy.
Frank is a very bad guy. And I would say in the book, it doesn't make him out to be as bad as it does in the film.
There are a few things in the film that I honestly think, and this may be because Clive Barker both wrote the screenplay and directed the film, that he was able to improve upon. I find the film version to be superior to the novella because it feels more like a completed story.
And also when, Frank does dispose of Julia pretty quickly.
Yeah.
When he
sure
has
does.
Kirsty ready and willing.
Younger model.
Yeah. But I think at its core, this book is definitely something that if you haven't seen Hellraiser and you want to read the source material, I think it's a good go. If you have seen Hellraiser and love it and want to read the source material, that's great too. But if you're not interested in either and don't want to read or watch, I would say trust your gut, because it is filled with guts and blood and sex and darkness and
sexual
hell
violence
and demons.
It's a hardcore book.
It is not a happy ending.
You made many faces while reading it.
I said, "Oh God,"
many times.
God.
Yeah.
I had I usually read.
You had to stop
before
a couple
bed.
Times. Yeah,
I couldn't.
So I've definitely pushed you a bit, and for our next installment, I may revisit that tactic and try to be a little bit more along the lines of what you'll enjoy. But I just had a feeling like, even though it was perhaps a bit outside your comfort zone, you would still appreciate its gothic nature, how well written it was.
Yes.
And
I did.
The fact that listen, if you're going to go to a dark place, in my opinion, it's worse to promise that you're going to go there and then pull back. Clive Barker does not pull back. When he says he's taking you to a dark place, you realize you don't know the meaning of darkness.
Well, that's it's like part cautionary tale. But I will say that the ending of the book, the novella, is Kirsty thinking about if this puzzle box could bring she and Rory back together. And I'm just going to read the last couple of sentences of the novella. She would wait and watch as she had always waited and watched, hoping that such a puzzle would one day come to her. But if it failed to show itself, she would not grieve too deeply, for fear that the mending of broken hearts be a puzzle neither wit nor time had the skill to solve.
Damn. This is a horror novel.
Yeah.
Allah.
So,
Allah.
I really appreciated sort of her arc, but like this puzzle.
Quite different from the movie.
Quite different from the movie.
Yeah.
So, I'm glad that I read this.
Wow.
It is not my favorite thing that I've read.
Didn't think it would be.
Which you and I approach this totally different.
Yeah.
I want you to have a new favorite, and because of me.
I use this as an excuse to to expose you to something that I think you're gonna listen. I never choose something to be like, oh, Laura's gonna fucking hate this. I always think I'm pretty sure she's going to like this, but I'm also pretty sure that if I wasn't asking her to do it for this episode, she may never experience it on her own.
No, I wouldn't. I would not have finished it.
Yeah.
I would have read maybe the first 20 pages and then been like, I'm not reading this book.
Well, when I read it, I think I was maybe 17 or 18, and
That's probably how old I was when I read Harvest Home.
Absolutely devoured it, and everything Clive Barker wrote at the time. I miss the old Halcyon days of his dark work.
Well, Terror in Tandem fans, you know that he is a sick fuck.
Richard yes. But if you are interested in Clive Barker, The Damnation Game, Weave World, Thief of Always, those are fantastic. Some of them are just fantasy. Some of them aren't
like Weave
horror.
World, right?
Yeah, that's not really a horror novel.
Well, I also just wanted to mention that I did watch the first Hellraiser movie.
But I was very surprised.
And it was disgusting, and I hated it, but I didn't hate it. I like to see the character of Julia. Yeah,
and boy, is she something in this movie.
But, oh, God. I mean, it was not palatable.
Well, a few things. Kirsty in the movie is the
Rory's
daughter. Rory's daughter.
But his name's not Rory.
No, because he's an American.
Yeah.
And
Clive Barker's like from Liverpool. Right?
He's British. Yeah, he's a Scouse. So Clive Barker wrote the screenplay and directed it. He has not directed many films. It's an absolute classic. I was shocked as fuck that you just all apropos of nothing started to watch it on your own, and I was like, "Oh God, are you
Well,
sure?"
because you had reminded me of the novella that you made me read, and the tome
That doesn't sound like me.
that I made you read, which was
No.
like 360 pages, which is
It was
the
400
average
pages. It's
size
so good.
of every book.
Harvest Home is fantastic. Everyone should read it. It's it's another actually extremely sexual book. Because it deals with fertility rights and the earth and Mother Earth. So there's a lot of
but
talk about making
in a corny
corn.
way, not in a
No, I'd say it's
bloody way.
well,
No, the sex not so much in a bloody way.
more like what happens right after the sex.
Yeah,
Little praying mantis aspect of it. But
yeah, it was very like
well, in the spirit
Black Widow-ish.
in the spirit of that, and I did watch most of Hellraiser with you because I hadn't seen it in a while, and damn, it's just as good as ever. Just as good as ever.
It's
Andrew
so
Robinson
gross, everyone.
is fantastic.
I mean,
Doug Bradley.
Richard knows I don't like body horror.
She doesn't.
So he made me read a novel
That is 90%
that
viscera.
is filled with descriptive language.
Yeah, it could have been called Sweetmeats the Novel. So, well, to pay you back, I did a little research and discovered that Harvest Home has indeed been adapted once in 1978 as a 2-part made-for-TV miniseries.
I used to love those, but I have not seen this
That
one.
I have. And I'm going to say it's pretty damn good. It now it's certainly it's 4 hours long.
Yeah, but it's 2 parts.
Yeah. Well, when you watch it all at once like I did, and unfortunately, it's not really available anymore. The only way I was able to find it, it is on YouTube. Some wonderful person has uploaded it to YouTube, but it's in 1970s television format, so it's blurry as fuck and the sound is bad. But it's a pretty faithful adaptation. I preferred the book because, the nature of television, especially at that time, it shows a lot more. I mean, it tells, a lot more than it shows. There's a lot in the book that you are pretty easily able to figure out without being spoon-fed the answer. And in the televised version, it's a bit more like, here's what's going on. Now, here's the thing. The cast. The Widow Fortune is played by none other than Bette Davis. Yes, Bette Davis. So Bette Davis is a horse and buggy driving, black outfit wearing witch and like town matriarch yelling about corn and giving speeches to like the ancient blood goddess. It's fucking awesome with her, nasally cigarette smoker voice. Making the corn, and she shall make the corn. It's fucking awesome. Also, Michael O'Keefe, Danny Noonan from Caddyshack, and he's been in a million things. He plays Worthy Pettinger. The beloved late great Rene Auberjonois plays Jack Stump, and he does a beautiful job. This is many years before Benson and Star Trek Deep Space Nine, the best Star Trek. Fight me. But he's great. It's just got an incredible cast. Theater actor David Aykroyd plays Ned, who in the movie I think his name is Nick. I don't know why they changed that. And Rosanna Arquette, a very, very young Rosanna Arquette plays his daughter Kate. So it's really worth a watch because it is an oddity. And it's made for TV in the 70s and it has some limitations there, but they do go all out for the Harvest Home scene. I'll give them that. It's a pretty lot of extras. It's a pretty big production, and it's quite faithful to the book in many ways. I just think it spells things out a little bit too much. The book I thought was more satisfying to figure it out on your own. And like I said, it's not ambiguous. You figure it out, but it's worth the price of admission just to hear Bette Davis yell about making corn, and you know what she's talking about. Betty,
yeah, exactly.
Minx. Making that corn.
Well, as you decide to play with your puzzles and corn this weekend, feel free to read or watch any of the things that we made each other.
And here's hoping from Terran Tandem Land that you have a special someone to make corn with this weekend.
Or any weekend.
Or, you know what? Shuck your own ear. That's fine too.
See ya. Terror in Tandem is written, produced, and recorded by Laura and Richard Mathiasen, and edited and mixed by Richard Mathiasen. Our theme was written and performed by Carrie Denver, and all other music was written and performed by David Suspanic. All opinions expressed on this podcast are our own and should be taken as such. Thanks for listening, and please remember to give us a like, a review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. See you next time. We're still